Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Eternal Heart, The Mystical Path to a Joyful Life by Carl Mccolman. Narrated by William Sarris. 0. Infinity. Sometimes the key to opening up possibilities in life can come from something as simple as learning to see things from a new perspective. For a rather playful example of this, consider the number 8. If you tip it on its side, it opens up into infinity. I know this is hardly earth-shattering. Indeed, it is something everyone who has ever learned even basic mathematics has figured out. Probably every teacher who has ever taught a class how to make an infinity symbol has had to deal with the smart-alecky kid in the back corner saying, "That's just a figure 8 on its side." I was that kid. Incidentally, the technical name for the infinity symbol is a lemniscate, referring to any type of figure 8 curve that can be calculated in algebraic geometry. Incidentally, one of the first philosophers to study the mathematics of the lemniscate was the pagan mystic Proclus, who influenced the early Christian contemplative writer Dionysius the Pseudo-Areopagite. Human ideas, thought, and imagination all get codified in symbols, letters, numbers, punctuation, and algebraic symbols, and we use these symbols to create mathematics and language, to communicate, to ponder, to speculate, and to wonder. And here we have two symbols that are essentially the same thing, only the orientation is different. You can find other examples of this, such as the letter M and the Greek letter sigma, which also shows up as a mathematical symbol. But for now, let's just linger with 8 and infinity. Consider these lovely words from the poet William Blake. To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. Spiritual life thrives when we see things from new angles and perspectives, when we open up to make connections we didn't notice before, when we imagine new possibilities and potentialities. And then we not only see these hidden possibilities, but by the grace of God, they can help us make choices and commitments that generate blessings for all. Tip infinity on its side, and it looks like the number 8. 8 is hardly infinite. Truly, it's an unassuming number. Everyone loves 3. Third time is the charm. 7 gets to boast about being the number of chakras or sacraments, and 9 gets repeated ad nauseum on the worst song the Beatles ever recorded. But poor 8. Its only claim to fame is that it equals 2 cubed, 2 times 2 times 2. And yet, hidden in this most humble of numbers is the symbol of infinity itself. But you have to look at it sideways to see the possibility that a new perspective brings. The wisdom of seeing things from a different perspective has ramifications far beyond the trick of moving characters on a page. Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh talks about a concept he calls interbeing, a way of learning to see how everything is connected. If you are reading a hard copy of this book, consider how the paper comes from a tree that grew in a forest or a tree farm, a real place with a real physical location. That tree lived and grew for years, nurtured by the sun, the soil, the rain. Looking at this or any sheet of paper, you recognize that the sunlight and the dirt and water wove together to make this piece of paper possible. Take a step back further and consider how pretty much everything that exists is fashioned of the cosmos itself, stardust. When the electronica musician Moby sang, "We are all made of stars," he was telling the truth. Interbeing exists whether we notice it or not. It's a hidden reality, but hidden only by the limitations of our perception. With a little thought, a little imagination, and a willingness to see with fresh and open eyes, what another Buddhist teacher, Shunryu Suzuki, calls beginner's mind, suddenly interbeing is impossible to miss. And when we truly see how interconnected all beings are, it changes how we understand and relate to the world. You might call this a mystical understanding of the universe. In this book, the words mystic, mystical, and mysticism show up repeatedly, so they deserve some commentary now. In a sense, these are terrible words, because they get used by different people in so many different ways that they are practically useless. It's as if you drew a figure 8 at a 45-degree angle, so nobody could figure out if you meant to refer to infinity or simply the number after 7. Mysticism and its related words have, over the years, developed a similar ambiguity of meaning. And because mysticism often is associated with a kind of exotic spirituality, it gets lumped together with magic and miracles in a kind of alternative trifecta of the supernatural. But if we look at the Greek roots from which mysticism and its related words emerge, we meet a much more humble origin, more like 8 than infinity. Mysticism shares the same root that gives us the word mystery. This Greek word moeo refers to shutting or closing, like shutting your mouth or closing your eyes. It carries a sense of hiddenness, interiority, and ineffability, something that cannot be put into words. In the Hebrew Bible, the prophet Isaiah is recorded as praying, "Truly, you are a God who hides himself." Isaiah chapter 45, verse 15. The divine hiddenness or invisibility is one of God's most salient features. If you want to see the Pope or the Queen of England, you can. It might not be easy, since they are not the most accessible of folks, but they can be seen, on television if not in person. With God, there's no such luck. God remains hidden. Yet what the mystics have been saying for centuries now is that God is hidden in plain sight, if we only could learn how to see ordinary things in an extraordinary way. Or just learn to see in a new way, from a new perspective. If we can learn to find infinity every time we look at the number 8, then, like William Blake, we can discern heaven in a flower, or eternity in an hour. Which brings us back to our difficult word, mysticism. Mysticism includes that dimension of spirituality that teaches us how to see or know or even imagine the hidden God and the hidden ways of God. A mystic, therefore, is simply a person who has embraced this new way of seeing, this mystical dimension of spirituality. We can open up these words and find a lot more inside of them, like finding infinity inside the number 8, or entering Doctor Who's TARDIS, bigger on the inside than on the outside. Mystical spirituality invites us to discover a hidden life of meaning, purpose, spiritual consciousness, and joy. Mystics, great and small, famous and obscure, have testified to this hidden life for centuries now. Each mystic seems to have charted their own course through the wilderness, but even so, there is some basic commonality to the roads they follow, so learning from them on our own pilgrimage, we can find the landmarks and avoid the pitfalls as we make our own way. Why listen to the mystics? Many of them were poets and philosophers whose writings could often be frustratingly dense or filled with an endless series of paradoxes and unfathomable symbolism. Yet their words, puzzling as they may be, invite us to examine the inscrutable mysteries of life itself. We can choose to live in an unreflective way, always a slave to our appetites, prone to addiction, and easily manipulated by people who want to make money off of us. Or we can get angry and rebellious and lose ourselves in cynicism that can lead to bitterness or violence. We can try to conform to some sort of religious or political ideology in a fundamentalist or dogmatic way, and then spend the rest of our lives attacking people who see things differently. If we're clever, we might give ourselves to the pursuit of something noble, like art or science, and devote our lives to creating something that is beautiful or useful. And if our hearts are big enough, we might even lose ourselves in helping others, being of service in alleviating the suffering of the world. We might, finally, choose to consider what the mystics offer us, learning to see with beginner's eyes and from new perspectives, opening our hearts to imagine the possibility that life just might have to do with something a whole lot bigger than us, something mysterious and hidden, even as we see it showing up in moments of transcendent love, profound compassion, unexpected kindness or mercy, and inexplicable delight. The mystics have called this possibility, and the life that it calls us to, by different names: enlightenment, ecstasy, non-dual consciousness, union with God. That kind of elevated language has its place, but let's start in a more down-to-earth way, by simply taking the mystical path seriously, understanding that it will lead us to joy. For a joyful life is a heavenly life, a life well lived. Mysticism is generous. If you want to be an artist or a scientist while also pursuing the mystical life, you'll find there's plenty of room for both, or even all three. Mystical spirituality goes so well with the life of service to others or advocacy for justice that they are practically symbiotic. Being in service to others and to justice makes for a better mystic, and vice versa. And the luminous, life-expansive way of the mystic will beckon even the person lost in dogma or fundamentalism or addiction, although if you take the mystical life seriously, sooner or later it will wean you away from attempts to control or manage your life through rigid systems of belief. The mystical life invites us to see life from a new perspective, that of infinite joy. To find this perspective, we need look no further than the treasury of blessings already hidden in our hearts. The path to joy is a gift given to all of us. It is the first of a number of gifts that we can find in our hearts. This isn't a new path, but one celebrated by wisdom teachings found in many traditions. One of those traditions is found in the Jewish and Christian scriptures. But this isn't just an invitation for Jews or Christians. These gifts are in all of our hearts, just waiting to be recognized, acknowledged, and celebrated. When we find and embrace these gifts, imagine how they can transform our lives and the lives of those we touch. It's a transformation luminous with joy, and a transformation I hope you'll discover for yourself. Observant Christians and Jews regard their Bibles as sacred scripture. The sacred texts mean different things to different people. Some maintain the Bible contains no error. Others see it as the work of human hands, errors, smudge marks, and all, that nevertheless offers a glimpse into the mind and heart of God. Not everyone automatically accepts the wisdom, teaching, and authority of those sacred texts, or for that matter, the authority of other sacred texts, like the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or the Dhammapada. But whether we are naturally believers or skeptics, it's helpful to approach a spiritual text like the Bible with an open mind but also a discerning heart. To see infinity in the number 8 is a matter of perspective. Likewise, finding mystical truth in an ancient sacred text might just require a willingness to consider what it has to say with an unprejudiced eye. We read these sacred writings not just because somebody somewhere said these were holy books, but because their own content marks them as classics of spiritual wisdom and insight. I'm belaboring this point because Eternal Heart is organized around a series of gifts related to the heart, taken from the sacred writings of Hebrew and Christian scripture. I'm aware some readers have a kind of automatic acceptance for anything in the Bible, while others take more of an "I'll believe it if it makes sense" approach. Whatever your tradition or your view of biblical wisdom, I ask that you keep an open mind. See if these gifts of the heart can be inspirations to your imagination. Try to resist the urge to evaluate them strictly in terms of logic or reason. Receive these gifts with the wonder of a poet rather than the suspicion of a prosecutor, and then see where your heart takes you from there. And while these gifts of the heart are the golden thread we will follow throughout our journey together, I'm also weaving in another wisdom teaching found in the Christian New Testament. The set of 8 principles proclaimed by Jesus that are known as the Beatitudes, because each one begins with a blessing. Blessed are, in Latin, beati. Each principle offers insight into how we can cultivate its blessing in our lives. The Greek word for blessed, makarioi, also implies being happy or fortunate, or even living large. In other words, each of these Beatitudes is also a step on the pathway to joy. These 8 Beatitudes and 8 blessings of the heart are woven together like strands of spiritual DNA. Each supports and amplifies the others, and all call us forward to a life filled with hidden, that is to say mystical, joy. As we recognize, honor, and cultivate these spiritual qualities and gifts and blessings, we open our hearts and minds and lives so that this hidden joy might truly manifest. In the movie Toy Story and its various sequels, we meet a toy character named Buzz Lightyear, a Space Ranger action figure, who is known for his signature catchphrase, "To infinity and beyond." It's a bit of a joke. What can be beyond infinity, since infinity is by definition limitless? Yet this notion existed even before our action figure gave it voice. Elie Meor, a historian of mathematics, wrote a book called To Infinity and Beyond, A Cultural History of the Infinite. Which makes me think, why couldn't there be something beyond infinity? What's to stop the human imagination from poking into places that are beyond whatever limitlessness is? It's just a rhetorical question, but I ask it because the imagination matters, as do questions that give our imagination room to play. Let's imagine together. Let's imagine infinity and beyond. Let's imagine seeing things in a new way, and let's see what gifts await us, hidden in our very hearts. Then, let's imagine how those gifts can make our lives better and help us create a better world. Finally, let's imagine how the gifts of the heart can take us beyond our wildest imagination, from our hearts to the very heart of mystery itself, the mystery of infinite love, what the mystics call God. 1. Passage. The divine presence is everywhere, proclaimed Saint Benedict some 1,500 years ago. We do not have to go anywhere to encounter the mystery called God. The North African mystic Saint Augustine spoke the same truth in a different way. God, he said, is more intimate than my interior and superior to my summit. His words, originally in Latin, could also be translated as, God is closer to me than I am to myself, and greater than I am at my best. The divine presence is right here, inside each of us, both as we are and as we have the potential to become. God doesn't stand still when we grow or move. God also doesn't run away when we rest. Right here, right now, you dwell in the presence of the source of love, of life, of all being, the source of justice, of virtue, of all that makes life worth living. This includes, I might add, the source of all felicity, beatitude, and joy, but I do not want to get ahead of myself. This teaching has roots all the way back in the Jewish scriptures. One of the Psalms declares, "Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, the underworld, you are there." In the Christian New Testament, the Apostle Paul approvingly quotes a pagan poet, "In God we live and move and have our being. God is inside us. We are inside God. The divine presence is everywhere." This isn't just a Jewish or Christian notion. The Quran points out that to God belong the East and the West. Wheresoever you turn, there is the face of God. God is all-compassing, knowing. Surah 2, verse 115. The wisdom of the mystics throughout history echoes this teaching. "I saw that God is in all things," wrote the medieval mystic Julian of Norwich. 2 centuries later, St. Ignatius of Loyola, in his beautiful meditation, Contemplation to Attain Love, muses, "God dwells in creatures, in the elements, in the plants, in the animals, in human beings. God labors and works for me in all the creatures on the face of the earth." Later, in a letter, Ignatius expands this further. "Spiritual seekers," he wrote, "should practice the seeking of God's presence in all things, in their conversations, their walks, in all that they see, taste, hear, understand, in all their actions, since divine majesty is truly in all things by God's presence, power, and essence." Now, a confession. I need to keep reminding myself of what Julian and Ignatius and Benedict and Augustine and all the rest say over and over again. I need to keep reminding myself because I keep forgetting. I forget the divine presence is everywhere. I forget to seek God's presence in all things. I forget that wherever I turn, there is the face of God. Why is it so easy to forget that God is truly present? I think it goes back to the idea that God is hidden. We have to make our way through life trusting in the reality of divine love and compassion, even if it feels like sometimes we're lost in a fog. This reminds me of an experience I had on the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee. This plateau stretches out west of the Cumberland Mountains, part of the Appalachian Range. Where I lived on the plateau, in the college town of Sewanee, fog was a normal part of life. Usually it wasn't too bad, but once in a while the fog would get truly dense and dangerous, especially after sundown. More than once I would be driving home as the fog rolled in. When the fog got thick enough, even dimmed headlights barely illuminated 2 or 3 feet ahead. The light got diffused and reflected off the waves of mist. Driving in dense fog is like driving in a blizzard. Long-term residents of the mountain offered advice on minimizing the risk. No matter how cold it is, they said, roll down the window to hear what's going on, and slow down, even if it meant driving through the fog at 5 miles per hour. They also taught me to train my eye on the reflecting line painted on the side of the road, since that was the only way to be sure you weren't driving off the pavement of that small-town 2-lane highway. Fortunately, I always got home safely, but it meant taking my time, moving forward slowly, being careful, and constantly paying attention. Remembering to keep my eyes open for the hidden presence of God feels like the skill needed to drive through thick fog. It's about paying attention, listening carefully, and knowing when to slow down or even to stop. One of the great images for the mystery at the heart of the spiritual life is the cloud of unknowing, taken from the title of a 14th century guide to contemplative prayer. I often think about the Sewanee fog when I think about the cloud of unknowing, conditions that are so dense, so thick, so lost in mist and darkness that a journey can only be taken one step at a time and requires paying close attention to nothing beyond where the next step leads. But when we learn to trust the divine presence hidden in the mist, we can move forward with confidence as well as care. Like an encompassing band of fog, things cover our path, disorient us, throw us off our game, and challenge us in big and small ways. Health issues, financial setbacks, relationship problems, upsets at home or in the workplace, conflicts as small as a fight with a family member or as large as a nation at war. These life events that arise sometimes leave us feeling like we're just stumbling our way through the fog. People deal with the challenges of life in many different ways, some healthier than others. To deal with the fog of life's challenges and setbacks, we might focus on orienting our lives toward accumulating money or power, strategies we might adopt in order to feel secure or loved or in control. Sometimes these strategies, what the Trappist monk Thomas Keating calls programs for happiness, can be dysfunctional and can lead to alienation from others, to addiction, or even to situations where we are hurt by or hurt other people. Even at their best, the programs we build for happiness usually only offer us short-term benefits. Augustine described the fact of our human condition, that we all seem to be travelers searching in a fog, as our restless heart. In his Confessions, he offers a prayer as profound as it is simple. God, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. When I forget that the divine presence is everywhere, I feel like I'm lost in the fog. When life deals me challenges, again, lost in the fog. When everything, even life's blessings, ultimately fails to satisfy my restless heart, it feels like the angst of being lost in this cloud of unknowing. How can we allow our restless hearts to settle into the divine presence that seems so deeply hidden? Here we encounter a paradox. If God is both truly present and yet also hidden, we have no choice but to seek that hidden God, even in the cloud. Such seeking implies a journey, a spiritual path to follow. But this journey seems to be one into a place where we already are. Truth is a pathless land. Our lives are most certainly a journey of some sort, if only through time and place, but this spiritual journey, this pathless land, implies some sort of passage unlike any other. The mystics have compared it to climbing a mountain, exploring a castle, planting seeds, getting married, going on a pilgrimage, ascending a staircase, or simply just falling in love. But journeys don't just spontaneously happen, at least not most of the time. We go on a trip when somebody makes a decision. Maybe it's not always a trip we want, like going to the hospital or to court, but if we didn't make the choice, someone else did. Every trip begins with a call of some sort. The happiest ones are when the call emerges from within ourselves or from a loved one. Hey, would you like to go to Ireland for our summer vacation? But other calls can come from a neighbor, a business associate, a draft board, a dying parent, a spiritual teacher, a foundation, a rival. And spiritually speaking, a call can certainly come from God. In fact, to the extent that any journey we take can be a spiritual journey, it's fair to look for God's hidden involvement whenever life or someone invites us on our next adventure. Since the divine presence is everywhere, God must be present somehow in every call. One of the Psalms in the Hebrew Bible says, "Happy are those whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion." Psalm 84, verse 5. On the surface, it appears that this psalm describes the happiness an observant Jew would find by making a pilgrimage to the sacred city of Jerusalem. But this thoroughfare that leads to spiritual happiness is not a physical road, but a highway in the heart. As this psalm was written 2,500 years ago, the word highway does not mean the asphalt-covered, traffic-congested freeways of our time, dangerous to pedestrians and foul with the fumes of exhaust. Try to imagine something more earthy and organic, a pedestrian parkway, where anyone is welcome to travel. In the poetic words of Antonio Machado, the path is made by walking. Your heart may be restless in such a way that no earthly satisfaction can ever quell its desire. But the path to fulfilling that desire begins right there, in the center of your restless heart. This is the first gift of the heart, a pathway to all the other gifts. One of the great masterpieces of Western spiritual literature is a small book, likely written by a Russian Orthodox monk in the 1800s, called The Way of a Pilgrim. It's a book about living a life immersed in prayer. The subject of this book is a wanderer. We often associate the word pilgrim with traveling for spiritual purposes, like going to Jerusalem or Lourdes or Mecca. But pilgrimage does not necessarily require a carefully planned itinerary. As spiritually motivated wandering, pilgrimage has a long history, such as Abraham leaving his home to respond to God's call, or Ruth, the Moabite woman, who travels with her mother-in-law Naomi in search of a better life. The saints of the early Celtic lands saw pilgrimage as a holy act. It was a search for the place of your resurrection, which is to say, the place where you will die and someday be raised again. Not many people think in those terms now. We move somewhere to go to school or to pursue a job opportunity. We don't see ourselves as settling down and establishing roots. We're just passing through. In that sense, the spiritual sense of pilgrimage has given way to a more rootless, perhaps even anxious, way of perceiving life as a self-interested journey. Spiritually speaking, a pilgrimage might not even require a physical relocation. We might even embark upon a pilgrimage of the heart, an idea that makes sense in light of the psalm, where the highway of our spiritual journey begins right in our hearts. This first gift of the heart is its capacity for pilgrimage, whether physical or spiritual. Even if you live your entire life in one place, and there's something to be said for that, your heart may still be called to wander in wonder. Responding to that
Sample complete. Ready to continue?